In this video, an HOA fined me because I made my property disabled friendly. They claim that I am devaluing the neighborhood with my wheelchair ramp. Let's dive right into the video. So I live in a neighborhood where the HOA is extremely strict, and I learned the hard way that not following their rules will result in a swift and expensive fine being sent to me. I hate the rules that they have, but none of them are actually illegal, so they can get away with it. They have a clear idea of what they want, and most of the rules are made to kind of lay out that entire plan. It being that they want the neighborhood to look uniform. With some obvious minor things they cannot control, almost every house is the same color, size, material, build, etc. As an example, they want the grass to be green and cut the same way. When I got a fine, it was because I ended up having a patch of crap grass and not taking care of it in a timely enough manner. I've heard of people getting fined for garbage cans being out too long, or the house paint getting old and them not repainting it fast enough. For the most part, I can fly under their radar and just live a normal life. Well then, everything changed the day that I got the phone call from the hospital. My wife was driving home from her job and another car slammed into her before driving off. She got hurt badly and was stuck in the hospital for a long time. One of the problems was that when they crashed, her seat got shoved all the way forward, and they believed that it would cause the injury to her spine. When they told us that she was going to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair, it was a difficult day for both of us. Her legs were totally paralyzed and even her arms had minimal use. I was gonna need to do a lot of work to make the house accessible for her. I refused to let her live full-time in some nursing home or other place. I was determined to bring her home and have her life be as normal as possible. I know people are already reading and thinking, oh, just sue the guy who hit her and get rich and then you can afford everything you need and full-time help. Well, the money alone would have helped a lot, but since he drove off, we never found out who hit her, so there was nobody to sue. Our savings and insurance were gonna need to be enough for us. I altered our sidewalk so it was flatter and easier for a wheelchair to roll on. I got the porch demolished so that it would now be a ramp going into the front door. The back door I had built a lift for, extra handrails both in and outside of the house. There are many other modifications for the inside of the house that are not really relevant for the story. Anyway, I was gonna make sure things were as easy for her as possible. Now my house was not falling into that nice uniform look that the HOA insisted on anymore. I did not even think about them when I was making all the changes, because nothing aside from my wife mattered at that moment. She was able to come home, and I won't lie and say that things were not a struggle. I will say that they paled in comparison to the problems that the HOA now wanted to give me though. I got a formal notice from them flat out saying that disabled-friendly additions I made to my home were ugly and violated their rules about architecture. The letter went on saying that my house was going to lower the value of all the other homes, and doing so was apparently selfish on my part. I assumed they did not know why I did this, and telling them would cause them to back off. I was wrong, and they did not care about my wife continuing to call it ugly and say that it wasn't allowed. They demanded that I remove all of the modifications I made to my house, and if I did by a certain date, they would let things go. As you can imagine, I refused to take anything down and knew that they could not make me. Before her accident, my wife worked in a law office. This means that she had seen multiple people come in having problems, and while she didn't know everything, she did know about the ADA and how it granted people with disabilities many things. We told this to the HOA, but they had flat out told me that the ADA did not apply within the HOA boundaries. I wanted to try and reason with the HOA president and set up a meeting to see him in person instead of just sending letters back and forth. Hoping that if he actually saw the two of us, he would understand that we did not make these changes for fun, but because of necessity. Me, thank you for meeting with us. President, have you come to tell me that you are removing those horrible changes you made? Because otherwise this meeting is a waste of my time. Me, we came to try and explain why we need these things. We didn't just do it for fun. You can see that my wife is in a wheelchair, and the changes we made were not just for aesthetics. President, it still ruins the property values. Hell, she might ruin them if you plan to actually bring her outside. Wife, I can hear you, you know. A wheelchair doesn't make me deaf or invisible. President, I'm not arguing this anymore. If you don't remove those things, you will be getting daily fines. Me, you cannot do that. President, I can do anything I want to keep the HOA from falling apart like you two want. We left knowing that there was no reasoning with this guy and instead went home and waited to see their next move. They were sending us daily fines which we did not even pay, but instead saved them to be able to show to our brand new lawyer. Actually, it was the same lawyer that my wife used to work for and did us a huge favor by helping us for free, since our savings were basically gone after I made all the changes. Other neighbors that we had were fantastic and wanted to do anything they could to actually help us. Mostly that was giving us support and agreeing that their HOA went over the line by what they said. To my horror though, we had some neighbors on our block tell us that they agreed with the HOA. That supposedly they would not be able to sell their house for what it was worth once they saw somebody like my wife who was living there, using language that I would not like to repeat. My wife is watching me type this and wants me to add that she let those people have it once they started to say those things to her face. I did not want to have to bring things to court really, so I tried my best to try and find some loophole in the HOA guidelines that would say we could have these adjustments to our home. We couldn't ignore it either though, because with all the fines I was worried about them trying to take our home or some other extreme thing. Either way, I had the lawyer and was ready to take them to court. Then I found something that changed all of that and avoided a lawsuit altogether. There was something in the guidelines, and the problem was that I was looking in all the wrong places. I was searching aspects of the guidelines that had to do with home renovation and architecture. That was where I was not finding anything. It turns out they had put something about people with disabilities in their bylaws, but they hid it. They had some sections I was ignoring because they didn't seem to matter in the slightest. For some reason that I still don't know how they got away with, it was stuffed right into the middle of a section regarding holidays. Within clauses about not setting off fireworks and the wattage allowed for Christmas lights, it was there. Plain as day, it said right in their own bylaws that not only are the changes I made allowed but actually required. It stated that reasonable accommodations for disabled residents need to be met in order to comply with ADA laws. Further, it stated that the HOA had a specific fund in order to help residents pay for these accommodations. I printed all of that out and made sure to bring the letters from the HOA that were fining me and going in direct contrast with what the bylaws said. I took it right to the HOA president and dropped everything on the desk in front of him. I could not help having a smug look on my face because right at the top of the pile was an invoice for everything I had to pay for that insurance that didn't cover regarding the changes I made to my home. The president looked at everything and I figured that he would be angry or at least look a little bit defeated. Instead, he laughed at me and told me that he was not paying anything and that he was not gonna stop giving me fines, claiming that if I tried to sue him, he would still manage to get his way. Me, well, that's fine with me. I think there are some local news stations that would love to hear a story like this. I can read the headlines already. Evil HOA president denies aid to poor disabled resident. They would eat a story like that up and might even come here to interview you. Hearing about me going to the news finally awoke something in him as he realized this was not gonna end well for him if I was to walk out of the room at that point. He caved and officially redacted the fines and told me that a check would be sent from the fund that they had. The check and an apology letter came a week later. My wife and I were celebrating at first like we had won some huge victory, and it was the first time since the accident that we were smiling and being genuinely happy. The entire atmosphere of the other residents seemed to change too, as they saw the HOA was actually beatable and maybe they did not have the iron grip that everybody seemed to think that they did. I hope the president learned that he couldn't just bully all the residents with the fines and other threats in order to get what he wanted. And if anybody else has a problem with the changes to my home, I dare them to try and confront my wife about it. She might not be able to punch them, but she might destroy them with her words or run them over with her chair. And yeah guys, I'm curious, if you would have been in this situation, how would you have handled this? I mean, it seems like OP kind of came out on top at the end, but I still feel that the horrible HOA and especially these despicable and discriminatory neighbors would have deserved much more, meaning much worse. Either way, let me know what you think in the comments. The next one is titled, My brother 18 has been poisoning my girlfriend 24 for the past 3 years. So my girlfriend has always been allergic to lactose very severely, to the point where if she had any traces in her food, she would basically poop herself on the spot ever since she was a kid. My brother and I have always been on good terms and always hang out together until 3 years ago when I met my girlfriend. He started getting more distant and mean towards me, talking about how she is ruining our broship and taking me away from our family and him. I told him that he was crazy and didn't think too much of it until recently. So going back 3 years ago when I introduced Katie to my parents, he was livid. I moved out about 6 months later because I was tired of his constant complaining about her, coming over to sleep and hanging out. Ever since then, we would have family dinners at my parents' place every month on Sundays. My family is Italian, so we eat a lot of pasta and sauce, which is relevant. So my parents always made 2 separate meals ever since they met her, one with no milk and lactose-free milk for Katie and one for the rest of us. She never had issues unless there was an accidental cross-contamination, which happened every so often. The problem was, every month at those dinners, she was getting sick to the point of rushing to the bathroom and having excruciating diarrhea for an hour with severe cramps. Every single time. At one point I started refusing to go and my parents kept insisting, so I gave it another try. It was fine for a few months, but then it started yet again. This goes on and off for 2.5 years. I got really mad last week and got up in the middle of dinner and said to my parents, something is up here and someone is messing with Katie's food. My parents go quiet and ask me why I would say that, and my brother turns rather pale and stopped smiling. I knew it was him. I confronted him and he started crying, saying that he felt like he had to get payback at her for stealing away his big brother, that it wasn't fair. He said he was adding milk to the batch made for her and he had no regrets. I was of course absolutely livid. Katie was as well. She excused herself and asked me to drive her back to our place. It's now been 3 months and she cut contact with my parents. Katie refuses to talk to them anymore because they should have had my brother in check and give him a worse punishment, but he literally just got a talk, a smog behind the head, and that was it. And I guess OP wanted to say a smack. Anyway, said that she cannot believe I didn't stop talking to them as well. My parents, on the other hand, are mad that we let this little incident break our relationships. My girlfriend says if I keep contacting them and insisting she forgives my brother, she is gonna leave me. I love this girl to death. We've got plans to buy a house eventually and have kids. On the other hand though, I love my parents too, but I cannot have both anymore. So, what should I do? Top comments: your brother is an evil, selfish, petty little screw up and you should distance yourself from him until he grows up. You did not ruin your broship with him, he did. Another person said, I would point out to the brother exactly how his actions ruined their broship, and hell, because of his actions their relationship will never be the same. Even if he does choose to forgive him and continue having a relationship, the trust is obliterated, and I would make sure to point out to him that it is a big if in regards to continuing the relationship. Another commenter said, why would you want to forgive or speak to people who would sweep your brother's horrible behavior under the rug? Your parents had to know that he was doing it, and that is why they asked why you thought that instead of immediately denying it. She has a choice, either she stays away from them entirely or she bounces. Update to the story. So I've read over 200 comments from you guys and it just validated my mind that my family is screwed up. I contacted my mom and confronted her about why she would defend my idiotic brother, and she basically said that he was just young and stupid. Ah, the best excuse of all times. It just always works, right? Despicable. Anyway, I told her a few of your comments and that Katie could press charges, and then she broke down crying, saying he won't do it again. Hell no, he won't, because I told her I decided to cut them off for good. Katie was actually relieved when I told her I was on her side and cut them off. Basically told me she was gonna dump me for being an idiot who couldn't support his girlfriend of 3 years when she was basically being tortured for fun. I'm just glad she didn't and that we are getting through this together. Thank you guys for every comment and even the ones calling me out for being an idiot, trying to make Katie forgive my brother for the horrible things he did. When you're faced with this kind of dilemma and you've been close to your family for over 20 years, you get blindsided. So me and Katie cut them out starting today, and we plan to move to the US next year. We always wanted to live there and finally be far away from them. And the next one is titled, Should Not Have Made Fun of Me. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It is sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that makes you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these forgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people should not be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict was not the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning I see her car park into the disabled parking bay as she already has a blue badge, but only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I did not have the chance to talk to her yet when a work truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they should not be parking there as it is for the disabled and he does not have a badge. What happens next? I cannot forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability and claim the cast on her leg was a fake and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible and then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limb laughing away with their teenage kid while the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they did not care or did not want to get involved. For years I worked in this store, always seeing this scumbag builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled base and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store and this scumbag was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute douchebag. Yet this year I was blessed with good fortune and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations. But instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It did not take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly did not take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule, no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know damn well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it was not long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learned their lesson as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule number 2 is don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course not, they have not learned their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we did not have many spaces for in the first place. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they started receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught.
But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learned their lesson? Would you be surprised if they hadn't? As it did not take me long to find them. Rule number 3, you must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to F this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but cannot fit the big-ass car in it? Boom, that ain't inside a marked bay, and ka-ching, another ticket and fine for them. Have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That is right, Scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun until eventually Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way, my time or money is not wasted, and secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatedly changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a ton of time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines building up over time for being scum. The cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket accusing them of being the one giving them all the fines. This put me at peace, knowing this must have seriously gotten to them and caused them to still be raving mad after 3 years. And Ripestories, if I understood this story correctly, this scumbag parked in disabled parking for over 7 years? How is that even possible that nobody intervenes? That is absolutely shocking.
Before we end the video, we will read a funny story from r/petty revenge that is brand new. It is titled "Set a Trap and Got the Laziest Guy Fired." So a few years ago, I worked at a hospital in the environmental services where I gathered up the accumulated trash and medical waste to be disposed of. It was not a hard job and worked well for someone like me with ADHD, as it involved lots of walking. I could usually get lots of the hospital clear by my lunch break, as we worked in pairs to clear the building. But then we had a new guy come in. His name was Ben. He seemed nice, but soon things began going downhill. I showed up for work one day and the bins were overflowing. Then the next day and the next day were the same. I would have so much garbage being accumulated that I would not be halfway done with my section by lunch and had no time to get the medical waste taken out. I complained multiple times to management, who were also getting heat for the piling up of waste. We all suspected that Ben was not doing his job, but we could not find proof, and he honestly was a good liar. So I decided to set a trap. One Friday, I saw that the bin in one area was overflowing and that that particular wing of the hospital would be closed on the weekend, so the trash would not change. I took a photo of the bin and left it in there unattended, knowing that Ben would be working the weekend. I came in on Monday and checked the same bin and saw that it was exactly the same. I took another photo and showed my boss. Within minutes, she was calling Ben into the office and confronted him. He tried his usual lies, but when I showed the evidence, he just sat there stone-faced. It turns out he spent most of his day hiding in the hospital and messing around on his phone. He was fired and blackballed from all the departments of the hospital. It felt good knowing that I did him in. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and I will see you again tomorrow.